It had been about 10 years since humanity had discovered what they affectionately call the merfolk, a semi aquatic species found on a more garden slash jungle type world. Though mostly amphibious, they do resemble humanity a lot, especially in appearance, being bipedal, two arms, two eyes, and so forth. However, of course, being that they're going to spend a lot of time in water, they lack the initial hair, which is one of the areas of contention. Most of them didn't want to deal with humans because, well, they didn't understand the concept of hair or fur or anything like that. It was strange and odd to the touch, although on many occasions you would find them petting humans, trying to figure out the structure of hair simply by looking at it or feeling it. But this obviously wasn't going to work all that well. Although, when they were introduced to what humans call the meows, or kitty cats, as many people like to call them, they were in for one hell of a shock. The fact that the kitty cats are such small creatures and absolutely covered in fur surprised the living crap out of the merfolk, and they could not get enough petting time on the kitty cats, although this eventually would become an annoyance, and many of the kitty cat delegation would not want to deal with them, at least within arm's length, as the merfolk seemed to not have the ability to stop from checking out to see how soft and furry and fluffy they were. Not all of them, of course, kept their fur long. Many of them kept it very, very well manicured and well trimmed. However, it didn't matter. It was still nice and fluffy. And they even said so once they understood what the word actually meant. The merfolk, when dealing with humans, were more surprised that humans were interested in them in more than just learning their culture. They wanted to look through their planet, look through their history, but also look through their biology as well. This led to more interesting events where more than once a merfolk was caught with a human. It didn't matter which way the sexes turned, whether it was male on female, female on male, of which side was going where. This was more of a faux pas than anything else. In merfolk societies, since they're more, shall we say, medieval in the way they're thinking, the idea of a female of their species giving it up to a human was seen as a great degradation to their families. So, of course, the humans trying desperately not to piss them off because, well, let's face it, we couldn't track them when they're in the water. We still didn't even understand how they survived under there, what their houses looked like, or anything like that. All we knew is that they retreated back into the water. It was what it was. Though there was obviously going to be a black market for some to take a few of the merfolk, this did not go without humans noticing. Several of the black market slash pirate ships, if you want to call them that, ended up finding out the hard way that the majority of humanity did not appreciate that much at all. Didn't matter how wealthy the person was either. At this point, humanity did not care. So many different colonies, so many different worlds, so many different ships, so many different stations. One person did not have the financial backing to protect themselves from being completely exposed if they tried to, shall we say, commission one of these. It was more than once that it was seen that a few humans were actually attempting to almost force themselves. In one case, a female got more than a little intoxicated and was pushing one of the merfolk males down and trying desperately to get him ready for action, and it was very quickly subdued. The female was, of course, dragged off to the brig and told to sober up. It was several days of apologies, and eventually everything settled back down. But there was, of course, tensions. The main area of tension was the fact that the merfolk believed that their planet was the center of the universe, something that every species goes through. And yet, they did not fully understand, once they were shown star charts, of how this was even possible. It took a long time of learning to translate their language, even though the translator itself was helpful. It would mispronunciate many words and phrases. Human slang had to be avoided at all cost in this case, and Eventually, they learned. They realized where they were in the universe, what star they were, what a sector was, and all this other fun stuff. They were actually truly surprised when they realized there was more planets in their sector. There was almost 20 planets. Their sector was jam-packed, and many of the human scientists couldn't figure out how the planets didn't get caught up in each other's gravity well, being so tightly packed. Yet eventually it was discovered that one or two of the planets would eventually collide and cause their own asteroid belt, but that was not speculative for another 20 to 30 million years. Although when that did happen, it was believed that this planet was most likely going to be hit with several asteroids, several almost extinction level events. The only thing that would save them would be the fact that they do reside underground and underwater. They only come to the surface to harvest certain items. And this was more than enough to allow the humans to look through and see what they were like. And they were also able to get their eyes on some of the younger ones, as many of the royalty would be pestered enough by their young ones to allow them to come to the surface. It was very quickly found out that the young ones had to develop their lungs over time. If they were too young, they could not be removed from the water. Their bodies had not developed enough to actually survive outside of the water for more than a few minutes. Due to this, it was believed that the aliens were having some sort of asthma attack. As the humans went to bring all their medical supplies to see what was going on, the merfolk simply grabbed their kid and rushed them back into the water for barely a minute. And as soon as they were relaxed and everyone was calmed down, they would simply emerge back from the water and the child was fine. It was strange, but eventually everyone figured out and everything calmed down. And thankfully, no other major instances would happen after that. Due to this, humanity continued to expand and explore throughout the stars, being the fact that their own quantum entanglement energies was enough to keep humanity from aging. They needed something to keep them occupied. As we all know, boredom is the biggest danger when it comes to immortality. Though also traveling through space has its own pucker factor, of course, since there's a million ways to die in space and they all suck. Regardless of this, eventually they reached out several more sectors and didn't expect too much. After over 3 or 4 dozen sectors, a sector being an area of a star with its planets around it. So it would take a long time to explore all the planets within one sector. The humans began to lose hope of finding any others. In actuality, they looked at their wonderful cat folks and they realized that they had just barely reached the point where they could send out a signal to say, "Hello, is anyone out there?" And they simply stumbled across the moorfolk. If it wasn't for the fact that they were relatively curious, it's a good chance that humanity would have simply passed by the planet without a second thought. Yet eventually, several more sectors later, they did see something. They saw something on their sensors. The simple ship called Archimedes' Pen noticed it. It was way out, just on the edge of their sensors. But the sensors came back with a strange reading. It was not natural. Whatever it was out there, it was synthetic. So, of course, sending a signal back, they immediately, before even receiving a response, began to investigate, as is their orders to do so. And as they got closer, their sensors were honed in, tightly fixed to look at this artificial whatever it was, as they moved closer and closer to it. As they did not want to try and jump close to it, as in they didn't want to startle anyone, they had to use sublight engines, and this would mean it would take almost a week before they were actually within visual range, and another day before they actually got next to the damn thing. And on the 5th day, they began to get a much clearer picture. And the response from everybody was universal. What the hell is that? This clearly some sort of ship. It was not a station, as it wasn't in some sort of geosync orbit, but seemed to be moving. Not as moving in any cardinal direction, but no, keeping its prow, or what you could consider its prow, directly at the human ship as it approached. The human ship did not come at them directly, as in a straight line, as torsion is still a thing in space. So it seemed as though they were spiraling towards this thing. Although the spiral was very small, it wasn't hard at all for the human sensors to realize that they had kept the prow of the ship aimed at the humans. At this point, they realized something was going on. Was it AI? Was it another species? They were close enough now that they could send an ungarbled transmission, completely 100% clear. So they did. They announced themselves by their ship's name, the captain, and that they were here to talk. They were friendly. They would not engage. We are not the enemy, they said. We are not a threat. Please respond. For days and days and days they waited as they slowly approached. Slowly approaching, again sending one or two other messages, different messages in case something was wrong. They also sent their own alphabet out, their own translation system, so that those on the other side could analyze it. And as they got one day away from visual range, they suddenly realized that the ship began to back up. It was trying to make distance, and at that point the captain immediately halted the ship, told everyone to stop. The sudden hit of the retro engines was enough for everybody to jolt forward out of their seats. Many folks had to go in and get stitches or have a bone put back together as they went from almost half a G to a dead stop in just a few moments. This, as anyone would know, is enough to shatter bones against a bulkhead if you're not prepared for it. Most folks simply had bruises as they were still strapped in. Yet, those that were sleeping had one hell of a bad wake-up call. At that point, the captain again sent a message back to his home fleet, letting them know what was going on. They reached out again to the ship, saying, "We are not the enemy. Can you please respond? We are simple explorers. We mean you absolutely no harm." And with that, they waited a full 24 hours before beginning to move again. This time, the ship did not back up. As they moved 12 hours forward, suddenly the ship they were looking at again backed up a little bit more, again keeping the bow of its ship pointed. Again, they were told to stop, but this time they didn't slam on the brakes, but slowly put the brakes on and waited. They waited again another 24 hours, and again sent messages out, letting them know we are not a threat. It was a song and dance like this until they got within visual range. Even with the best optics out there, it would take a long time to cross that distance with sublight engines. The bow of the other ship was still staring directly at them, but now they were close enough that they could get a deeper scan of the ship, and their worries were verified. The front of the ship was a weapon, very similar to what humans use, as anything from destroyer class on up always has a dedicated main gun built into the ship. This is simply in case they have to fight off anything, shall we say, larger. This also made the ships very dangerous. However, until you opened up the actual bay doors, you couldn't fire it without ripping part of the ship apart. Any species good enough to scan them would realize this. Yet, they looked at the other ship in front of them, and its bow doors were wide open. If this thing was going to fire, it would only take a moment to do so, and at that range, it would only take maybe 20 or 30 seconds for a projectile to reach them. Enough to dodge at this point, but they weren't sure. If they were able to reach anything beyond light speed with their projectile, yeah, they're pretty much screwed. They're out there by their lonesome, no support. They began to scan the sector as they slowly began to approach, this time at half speed, showing that they are not a threat, trying desperately to show that they are not a threat. They checked to see all the different planets, but none of the planets in the area seemed to support life. The only planet that was close was something as lifeless as Mars used to be. That is, before humans started to terraform the crap out of it. Now, Mars is a lush and green planet. But at the time of humans reaching Mars, it was a dead world, covered in pockets of massive radiation. It took many years to clean up all that crap. And eventually, Mars is colonized. But the planet below this ship was simply dead. They sent out another message as they were going, asking one simple question: are you the protector of the planet below? This time, they got a response, a simple word: yes. With this response, the captain again halted the ship and opened communications directly and stated, "We are not interested in your planet. We are interested in communication and commerce." With that, they waited. They waited for 3 hours before they received a response. The response was simple. It was a question. Why do you not want this planet? The captain responded over the comms, "We have enough of our own. We're self-sustaining now. We do not want your planet. We want to know who you are." And with that, they waited another 2 hours this time. A different response. "You may approach." With that, they slowly approached, this time at a quarter speed, being very careful. They realized that the other ships was still ready to fire. If it wanted to, at this range, there was no way they could dodge the shot. Absolutely none. And as they got close, they began to see a whole bunch of different ships coming into sensor range. These were human ships coming in behind them. Immediately, the captain sent a broadband communication out to all human ships: cease. I say again, do not advance. Do not advance. First contact is being made right now. Do not advance. And with that, every human ship halted in space as fast as they could. It's a guarantee that they had many casualties on board, as there was going to need to be a lot of bones reset and a lot of folks who were definitely going to need painkillers. With that, the ship that was above the planet simply stood there and waited. But this time, its bow was not pointed exactly at the human ship. It was pointed in between it and the fleet that was way off in the distance. And fleet is an exaggeration. It was only 7 ships. 5 explorer ships and 2 frigates. The only reason for the frigates was the fact that they knew that this was another species, but they had achieved spaceflight. The frigates were there as a defensive measure, as they were designed specifically for that, countermeasures, and they were covered in them. With that, the ship again began to slowly make its way forward. As it did, they could see that the ship did not move. And as they approached, as they got within several hundred kilometers, they simply showed that they are no threat by keeping all the weapons emplacements, to include point defenses, inside their blisters. And they turned broadside, giving the alien an absolutely perfect firing solution. You couldn't ask for better. Exposing the most fragile parts of the ship. And this worked. When the captain asked, "May we meet?" they received a response immediately. "Yes. Send one ship." The humans looked confused. One ship, we are one ship. But it was very quickly figured out that they meant a shuttle. They immediately got into the shuttle, the captain along with the medical team, along with a few others. It was a small delegation, only of about 10, and they slowly made their way. As they did, they asked the ship for any type of docking coordinates. Eventually, they got a response. It took about 10 minutes, but eventually they were given coordinates that pinged on the far side of the ship. And as they went over, they could see that there was some sort of opening, a strange round opening. And as they approached, suddenly the shuttle jerked slightly. The helmsman was confused. No matter what he did, he didn't have control of the ship. That is when the captain of the shuttle simply put his hand on the shoulder and said, "Shut it down. They're pulling us in." With that, they realized that whatever this species was had figured out some sort of tractor beam. They shut the engines down and were simply guided inside. As they did, they could see through the rear sensors that some sort of strange iris had shut behind them, closing everything and sealing it all. The sensors began to beep that an atmosphere was being filled inside the cargo bay. As the ship settled, a small ramp seemingly came out to the side, though it went to the wrong side. They sent a message to let them know that the doors were on the other side of the ship. With that, the ramp retreated, and another ramp was instantaneously brought out to that side and brought to the side of the ship. It was incredible to see the efficiency. As they did watch all this, they felt the ramp bump up against the side of the ship, and with that, they double-checked the sensors and opened the doors. This was a pucker factor of about 12,000 because you do not know what type of atmosphere is out there for certain until you take a breath. To their absolute shock, it was oxygen-rich but nitrogen-based. It felt really good. In fact, it was almost making them high at the idea of too much oxygen. Yet, they walked out. They followed a stream of lights that seemed to lead them in a certain direction. Eventually, it led them out of the cargo bay and into another area. They followed it as seemingly going down a strange-looking hallway into another room, and inside that room was empty. They were surprised. What was going to happen? And before they really had a chance to ask too many questions, a type of chair was raised up from the floor. It seemed to be very bulky, very wide. They worried about this, but it seemed as though the floor was set up to accommodate any type of being it might come across. The chairs themselves, though they were wide, as soon as the humans sat down, different parts began to go back down and other parts came up, seemingly contouring to each of the people sitting down. They all noticed that when they sat down, there was a large gap in the back of the seat, which very quickly filled in. A few people wondered if this was for aliens with tails or something like that, but they didn't have time to wonder. As they began to look around and ask questions, they noticed that a small screen had come down. But this one wasn't really a screen. It was a robotic voice. And this robotic voice seemed to be coming through the screen, but using it also as some sort of video. This was going to be one hell of an intro. A robotic voice came through. "Welcome. You have now reached the Zarnak system. We welcome you as friends, as long as you have no hostile intentions." Everyone looked at each other confused. Didn't we say that like 50 times already? Isn't our ship out there just in perfect firing position? The hell else do they want? "Please be ready to receive." They were like, "Receive what?" With that, another seemingly round door opened, and in floated something they were not ready for. They all stood up, almost in shock, but more out of respect, as most of them were military personnel, and they knew to meet someone always standing up. What floated in looked somewhat humanoid. In fact, it was more human than they wanted to even acknowledge. It seemed pale white, like perfectly white, on the skin, on the clothes. The small sheet that it wore was transparent and translucent as it simply waved around them. This thing seemed to float into the room. Its non-existent hair seemed to almost have waves of light coming from where hair would be. This thing turned to them, in front of them, and simply stated, "Hello. Welcome to our homeworld." The crew was amazed that it had learned their language. There was no need for a translator. However, this made perfect sense, as they had sent many recordings of their own translator across just to make sure there was no confusion, as they realized that this species was very advanced, possibly more advanced than even humans are. Even though the colony ship they were on was decades old, it was still considered relatively new by human standards. Yet what they were standing on was something else. The captain walked up and stated, "I am Captain Smith from the Archimedes Pen. It's a great honor to meet you," as he stuck his hand out to shake his hand. The Jarnac that was there did not raise his hand. In fact, he did not raise his arms at all. He simply continued to move forward, and he stood in front of them. Well, stood is a relative term. This thing again concealingly glided across the surface, and everyone began to chat. It was mostly technical stuff. Technical as in talking about how the ships are, how many there are, where the human sector is, and of course, what the hell happened to the Jarnac home planet. As it turned out, what happened was something that is not far off to what would have possibly happened to the humans, and they're grateful it didn't. The Jarnac had become a spacefaring race many decades ago. In fact, when you do the math, it's several centuries. Until then, they were semi-warlike, as they would have a large conflict every 100 or so years. Not nearly as much as humans, but it was enough. But once they reached the stars, everyone believed that they would be able to no longer need war, as they could simply create their own colonies, their own areas where they could have their own laws. If you didn't like one, you could leave. But it wasn't long until the Zealots began to turn their ugly heads in the direction. The Zealots demanded that anyone born in their sector, born on their planet, born on their station, and so on, belong to that station, belong to them, and they tried to forcibly instill that pride that comes always before a fall, and then the worst happened. The Jarnac went to war with each other, with weapons so powerful and so dangerous that they even made the human fleet shudder at the idea of what they had done. As they looked out at an image of the planet, the dead world that they were above, they realized that this was done with a single weapon. One weapon had taken out an entire planet in a single shot. This scared humanity to no end, as they would do anything to protect the precious jewel that they call Earth, and they would never, ever want to risk it. The Jarnac seemed to find this amusing when this was brought up, but he did hold himself. He didn't seem to laugh, but he did seem to grin a little bit, strangely human in the way he was. But they continued on. They asked the Jarnac what happened to the rest of his people, and he simply stated, "They are out there as he looked up towards a bulkhead and then looked around. Some are still out there, I am sure. We have ourselves in stasis when we are not needed, and our automated systems, he looked over as the steamingly screen moved towards him. Our automated systems are very advanced, especially in comparison to what you use. And they keep us alive, although we don't truly need it anymore after what happened. This time, it was the human's turn to ask a very big question. What happened to you? Because you're not biological anymore. We don't understand. The Zarnak seemed to have an air of shame in his eyes. And he is relative, by the way, to what they are seeing. But he simply stated, we were on the verge of extinction. If we didn't do anything, there wouldn't be any of us left. So we used our technology as best we knew how to do this. We became immortal by changing ourselves into energy beings. Though we maintain just a little bit of physical form, as you can see before you, we are mostly not biological anymore. We are almost just pure quantum entanglement, although what we truly are, we don't fully understand, as our knowledge of this subject was either lost, blocked from us, or not discovered yet. He then looked across each of the humans and stated, and eventually you will most likely do this to yourself so that you can also live forever. Many of the human crew began to snicker at this idea. The Zarnak was confused as he understood what human laughter actually was. This is amusing to you? The captain penned up, keeping himself professional. No, they need to zip it. And the rest of the crew suddenly went silent. You need to understand one thing about humans. We've already figured that out. The Zarnak was definitely confused at this point. Are you saying that you have figured out how to keep yourselves from going beyond? But you're still biological. This does not make sense. We used our quantum fields to do this to us. And you could see him begin to glow even more, the more distressed he was. The captain said, well, did you ever try to adjust the frequency? The what? The frequency of the field. Energies, waves, and frequencies. That's how you do it. No, it is simply energies and waves. With that, everyone seemed to look at each other almost confused, as he did not understand this basic fact about quantum mechanics. Tell you what, can we bring some specialists up here and we might be able to fix you? Because it seems that you're simply running on a frequency right now that's a bit off. With that, the AI jumped in. You do not understand. This is our way. This is what happens when you adjust your biology. Really? Well, tell me, my metal man, or whatever the hell you are, you ever thought about scanning one of us? Do you have bioscanners anywhere? With that, suddenly a bioscanner simply was rolled in on a mechanical device. With that, the captain simply put his hand down on the scanner. Within a few moments, the Zarnak looked and was absolutely amazed. There was no cellular degradation. Not one bit. It was like this human was in absolute perfect health, as though he had been at the absolute perfect age to be here. But how could that be if he was the one in charge? He looked a little bit older than the others, but only by a little bit. It was confusing. The Zarnak then simply asked, can you can bring us back? The captain was a little bit more confused. Possibly, I don't know. That's beyond my area of expertise. But you seem more than a little interested. Is there a reason for this? Why you would not like the current form? The Zarnak was a little dismayed by this, but finally decided to release all the information he had. You must understand that what you see before me is simply an optical illusion. If you wish to see me as I am, I might actually destroy part of your ocular design. So you're saying you're going to be so bright you're going to burn our corneas out? Yes. I changed the way this face is to make you more comfortable. This is not the way we look. Not originally. We are what we are. But I can show you what we used to look like. This time, the machine brought out a very large, sort of holographic display and placed it on the ground. What it displayed suddenly shocked the living crap out of the human crew that was there. The Zarnak looked very human, though a little small, only standing about 5 feet tall as a male. No one knew if the males were taller or smaller than the females, but this is what they saw. The skin was almost perfectly bleach white, the eyes shaped very wide, almost like almonds, but the eyes themselves were completely black. The nose was pushed down into the face so much that only a pair of small slits can be seen going diagonally up towards the edge of the eyes and then pointing down towards a mouth that was surprisingly human looking. The jaw was denigrated. It wasn't square at all, but very narrow. But what surprised everyone was the hair. Hair on the top of the head, though no eyebrows, no eyelashes that they could see. The hair itself flowed like fire, a deep, deep red. Fire engine and crimson red stretched all the way down its back. The arms of the hologram were raised up. They couldn't see any other hair anywhere. Hell, they didn't even see fingernails. They just saw strange round lumps. And they had 6 fingers. 2 thumbs, one on each side, and the actual 4 fingers. But it was basically like they had a pointer finger and middle finger and then another middle finger and a pointer. Then it stretched down as they didn't have much muscle tone at all. They were extremely lean. It was almost impossible to see that there were any muscles at all. They reached down to 2 legs. They were bipedal. No tails, no horns, no wings or anything of that nature. The feet came down to almost straight pads. They had no discernible toes that they could see, though the back of the heel did stretch a little bit farther. It was simply a big pad on the base. Though they had seemingly human-ish knees, it was strange to see what they were seeing. With this, the Zarnak said, "This is what we used to be. And as we are now, we can bring no more. We cannot create any more of our own. Our own biomechanics cannot do it." With that, one of the other crew members piped up, "Have you ever thought about artificial wombs?" The Zarnak looked at them confused. "Artificial incubation chamber? I don't, we would never, that is against us. No, bringing life synthetically like that outside of our companions is no. He seemed to grow brighter and brighter at the idea of this. "Well, this makes perfect sense," the captain chimed in as he raised his hand slightly to make sure the rest of his crew shut the hell up. "Tell you what, you let us bring our scientists over and see what they can do. Allow us also to look through your histories, and we will call it even, and we will do everything we can to restore you to your original form." The Zarnak was simply confused and kind of stuck in a loop as his mind went in several different directions at the same time. I ask one other thing. Name it. Can you find the rest of my kind? Tell you what, we can do one better. How about we find the rest of your kind and rebuild that rock that we're standing over? The Zarnak took a moment to realize what he was saying. And then suddenly, the Zarnak did something that nobody expected. He smiled.